start with, I'll ask you to give us your name and spell your last name, and to give us your title and your organization.
My name is Debias Seni. I'm a PhD in Human Resource Management, and I'm employed as a professor and chairperson of the HR area in Management Development Institute, Gurgaon, India. And Management Development Institute has been ranked as one of the top 5 management institutes in India. There are 1,500 institutes in all outside the university system, and the best ones are supposed to be outside the university system. It's a very unique thing, unlike USA, where management institutes are in the university systems. So that is how MDI, is not a university, but it is a premier management institute in India.
Great, thanks. I think you also said.
You settled in finally. There you go.
Okay.
You want to check that before we?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I think you said in your session that you also have a PhD in employment law. Is that true?
Yes. In fact, it's an interdisciplinary area. It is called Sociology of Industrial Relations Law. So it very much fits in the HRM in strategy and,
Great. What do you think one of the biggest issues facing multinational corporations in India is? And what are some of the key mistakes that multinational companies have made?
First of all, it is difficult to give a generic answer to this question.
Okay.
Because
Let me stop you right there because no one's going to know what the question was. So if you can say it's difficult, it's hard to say what some of the big mistakes that multinational corporations have made or something like that.
no, what I'm trying to say is that, multinational corporations are operating in different domains. You may be a BPO, you may be a software company, you may be manufacturing, you may be a service organization. So the problems will be different. This is what I'm saying. It will be difficult to give one answer which all multinational companies face. Surely, so far as, because a large number of software companies and BPO are there, their biggest problem is retention today. And they are all searching talent, and even Indian companies are having this problem today.
I believe you said in your session that that's certainly more pronounced than in other industries, the war for talent for software in particular. Is that?
Yes, because the attrition rate is as high as 60%. In some cases, it is 150%. So the choices are there, and even though 7 million graduates are graduating every year, 3.1 million graduates are getting employment. Despite this massive education industry, companies are critically looking at recruitment processes, and they are searching viciously the talent, especially in view of the fact that people leave and attrition rates are high. So they are developing strategies to retain their people, and there are many successful examples.
Can you give us an example of a successful retention strategy?
One successful example is Susken Communication, and they have evolved a commitment model of HR strategy. They give tremendous freedom and autonomy to their people. They do not have an attendance register. They do not monitor their people. And they have a mission statement where they say this is to tap the India creativity through the human resource. And they give a lot of respect to their employees. And this makes the employees feel honored and valued. And it has worked extremely well in Susken. They also have a very, very transparent HR procedures. Like, for example, you can come anytime. You may not apply for leave. You are trusted. It is presumed that if you are working at home, you are working for the company. And they also have transparency in the sense that everybody sails in the same boat, including the CEO and the top management. This also creates an atmosphere of delayering, that everybody is treated equally. And this is one company, which is doing great guns. Then I came across Prudential UK, which is a BPO of the Prudential Insurance Company in UK. And They say we do not compete on compensation because it is not possible for us to compete on compensation. And one consideration why they have gone to India is cost, and therefore they have to balance cost considerations and empowerment model. And I was talking to some of their workers, and this worker said, "This is a great organization, and you can come drunk to this workplace." So in HR jargon, we call this as idiosyncrasy management. That each worker is a class by himself or herself, and can we facilitate to manage the expectations of such a worker? And modern professional managers and managements have to understand this need of the worker. And this company has an attrition rate of just 20% against the usual average of 60% in BPO industry. And it is going great guns without competing on compensation.
Great, thanks. Can you tell us about some of the practices that may be common in India that might surprise HR professionals in the United States? I think a couple of things that you mentioned in your session today certainly were a surprise to me. That one of them was that there is corporal punishment in India, that workers can be struck, and that's not that unusual.
You see, today what is happening, that the whole world has become one globe. And then there is academicians and others are talking of what they say a convergence thesis. They say that the best practices and the usual management practices are likely to be similar over time. This is because of free movement of people, ideas, companies, and division of labor on the basis of competencies and so on and so forth. So Indian companies are aping the multinational companies. For example, Citibank has had tremendous impact on the working of Indian banks, because when a customer finds that Citibank is offering highly professional service, such banks lose business. They are in the business of credit cards, and I think there are at least 15 Indian banks who are also in the business of credit cards. So for them, Citibank is a benchmark, and it is highly professional. They are extremely courteous to the customer, and so this cannot be possible unless you have a well articulated and nuanced HRM strategy. And though many of these banks have not succeeded in making their services which are comparable to Citibank competitive, but the pressure on these companies is tremendous. And this is how, like Susken, for example, or even Prudential, for example, when these things get known to other Indian companies or even multinational companies, they try to the hilt to copy to the extent it is possible in their given milieu.
So going back for a second then, is it common for employers to actually strike workers in India? Is that unusual, or is that common?
No, it is not common, but it in smaller organizations. Supposing you are running a hotel. In hotel, I have commonly seen workers being beaten by employers, but it is not very common. So it depends. Some of the employers are very respectful. They will remove you if they don't like you. But some, I've seen, one day I was eating in a hotel, and I didn't know what was happening, that the worker was being beaten. He was bleeding and still he was being beaten. And he could not do anything. And next time I went, I found that worker still there. But it will be wrong to conclude that, this is a common practice. But then the question will arise, how is it that the worker was still working over there? So one has to go into deeper reasons for this. And this is that, the unemployment rate is very high. It is difficult to get jobs at lower ranks of the jobs. And it is possible that that worker might have committed mistake. Law will say that you can dismiss him, take action, but the employer would like to settle score there and then, and he would probably try to mend his behavior by beating. But it's not, abusing is also a culture in India, for example, in many places, that the worker is abused by if he commits a mistake. But there are some. I recently conducted a research, and I found that this man said that my competitive advantage is that I don't produce abuse. Abuse here means, calling names. It is not the same sense in which Americans use abuse word. Abuse means you're calling names, derogatory names. That's all. Okay, but that's a word in Indian context. Okay, it should be clear. So. I found that what is your competitive advantage? And I did this research, and this paper of mine is coming in Columbia Business Review, and they wanted to know what are the indigenous practices in India which are being followed by some of the smaller organizations. And I found that this company is having a competitive advantage by not practicing the abuse model and also being very caring and paternalistic to their employees. But one cannot say that it is not practiced elsewhere. In that belt, it was Panipat belt, where the rugs and carpets and are manufactured, and they are supplied all over America and Europe. And there are about 200 manufacturing companies. And I was told that almost all companies, they practice this culture of calling names to their workers, when they commit mistakes. So the question is why it is going on. It is going on because of the lack of good employment for workers, and they somehow stay because they think this is their fate, and or maybe that they realize that they have committed a mistake which they need to be punished, and the punishment need not necessarily be just dismissal. Punishment could be just this is a way of mending the behavior. I'm not saying whether it is good or bad, but this is practiced in some locales.
Okay. I wonder if we could try just summarizing that a little bit. That basically the high points that I heard were that in some situations that workers are subjected to name calling. Excuse me. That in rare instances they are struck. That it's not common, but it does happen, and that it is more likely to be tolerated by workers in certain jobs because they don't have the ability. Thank you. They don't have the ability to find other work. Is that something you could just say, probably in about 30 seconds, just to kind of summarize that?
This happens mainly in blue collar jobs. I have never seen it happening in white collar jobs. So
let me stop you for just a second, because when you say this, people aren't going to know what this refers to.
the calling names happens more in work in smaller establishments, and also in some areas where people are performing blue collar jobs, especially, say, for example, weavers, for example, in this case where I discovered this. But it is not a national feature. I found it only in that area which is called Panipat handloom industrial area. As I said, that India is a very diverse country. There are 544 dialects and then 179 languages, and cultures are different. If you go to Kerala side, you will find it's a matriarchal culture where women are very strong, and so it will be not proper to apply this to other locales. So it depends from area to area. And especially in smaller organizations where you employ 1 or 2 persons, people don't enjoy human dignity, and this is just a way of life. It is not necessary that it's a kind of a slavery, but it is just a way of life of some people.
Let's talk for a second about the diversity in India, because that is a lot. We're talking about, and I've talked to other people in the last couple of days about the number of languages, just the geographic regions, geographic differences, that there are a lot of differences. Can you talk a little bit about how the need for employers, especially multinational employers, to take that diversity into account when they are operating in India?
Okay, this is great. I'm of the view that no other country in the world is as diverse as India is, because of the language, because of the culture, because of the mores, and more so because of the castes, regions, gender issues. And India being a caste-ridden society, there is a lot of discrimination against lower caste and some untouchable castes which are called scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They are about 23% in the country. If you go to the hinterland, to the village, they are still not allowed to use commonwealths or, they are live in ghettos in one particular area. They cannot live in the area where the forward castes live. But this is not so in the cities where on paper it is all illegal. So in cities it cannot happen, and because there are people who can take up your causes. So this is one major area of diversity in India. And now political parties have come up to champion the cause of such people, and they are very powerful. They have had chief ministers, the head of the executive of states, from these communities. Okay, now so far as diversity management in multinational companies and others is concerned, by and large, it is not an issue in India today. And the reason for that, some people say, oh, this is an American fad. Diversity management is an American fad. It's a question of the necessity. What happens if you don't do this? You see, if you give a choice to a person, he would like to do things the way he or she likes, okay? And which means they would not like to practice diversity, because in USA, the diversity is practiced because of the legal implications that you can be, like in Denny's, for example, they were dragged to court and they had to give huge compensation. And today, Denny's is one of the finest organizations which practice diversity. So, in India, there are other burning issues, the issue of poverty, the issue of basic infrastructure, the issue of employment, and therefore, whatever diversity is practiced mainly by the state departments and its public sector undertakings by giving preferential treatment as it is provided by law in terms for employing people from these groups. But so far as private organizations are concerned, most Indian organizations do not have a diversity policy. And American and European companies have it because they have it in their own country. Okay, but as I was mentioning in my presentation, like British Airways has a policy of employing 50% women, and they are cashing upon this. For example, I remember I once lost my bag. I was traveling from London to Baltimore, and I was assigned with a lady, and I will never forget the way this lady treated my problem and handled me. And it just left an indelible mark on me. And maybe I'm not surprised if a male was given this responsibility, perhaps he could have handled. I was infuriated because I lost my bag and I was to do business the next day. And the way I was handled. So this is called in literature proactive diversity management policy. We do not have such kind of proactive diversity management policy in Indian organizations as of today. But multinationals still, in order to have the maximum of people who are different from others, they are practicing this. For example, it's very common in USA to have special policies or same rights for gays and lesbians, but this is absolutely non-existent in India. In fact, this cannot even be legalized. It is illegal. So this is one area of diversity. But when I was talking about Susken, for example, and people being given freedom, or I was talking about Prudential, that somebody saying you can come drunk to this organization. This is nothing but diversity management. That look, there is a person who is very idiosyncratic. He has his own tastes, his own habits, his own limitations. He doesn't want to come having had bath. He doesn't want to come in formal dress. He wants to come at 12 o'clock. He wants to bring his dog. And so some organizations are doing this. And Prudential, for example, when it gives liberty to you to work at home and come whatever time you want, this is another aspect of diversity management.
I'll go back for a second. One of the things that you mentioned in your session was the potential danger of relying too much on Indian managers without providing some sort of oversight. Is part of the potential problem that if you rely too much on Indian managers, that some of the issues you were talking about in terms of discrimination based on socioeconomic status, based on caste, based on some of the other elements of diversity,
I'm sorry to say that it's a hard fact that nepotism is too much in India. And if you do not make your managers accountable, whether they are expatriates or they are Indians, do not leave things totally in their control. Just see to it that they are doing their job. Because in today's business, you have to be fair. And workers are very smart. They want to be treated fairly, and they want to see that there is a policy of organizational justice in the organization. And when people enjoy power, they tend to misuse it, unless there is an accountability. I'm not saying that this will be there in all organizations. In first-rate organizations where you recruit high-profile people and who themselves have to deliver performance, it will be much less so. But it is not so much accountability in manufacturing organizations, where the possibility of misuse of authority by the middle management is huge. So I'm not generalizing this. But what I'm saying is that when you are doing business in India, you have to be in know of what is happening, because this is the price which Honda had to pay. And as I said, that you have a union leaders don't work, not a single day production targets have been realized, and all your plans and strategy go haywire in such a situation.
Okay, yeah, let's cut it off right there. Actually, let me ask you something. There's a reflection that shows up on glasses.
Right.
From time to time.
Okay, should I take off my? I can. In fact, I don't wear glasses.
No, we've already had it. Glasses.
Oh, I don't wear glasses. In fact, I thought I may have to read something to answer your questions.
Yeah, the reflection's fine.
Is it fine?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. If
No, it's okay. It's okay.
you don't mind putting them, it's actually better if you leave them on,
Okay.
because then it'll look different that you had them on. and take them
Is
off.
this okay?
That's
Okay,
fine.
fine.
Yeah. I just wanted to check, because he knows more
Okay,
about these things
fine,
than I
fine,
do.
absolutely fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It shows up every now and then. That's why I moved the light down that way, because if it was over this way, then it would be constant right there.
Okay.
So
All right.
it's okay. It's natural. You move your head and you get reflections.
Okay. And that's gonna show up, but that's gonna show up green on the, I mean, when we take out the background, that's still
And
gonna
his
show up
eyes
green.
disappear?
No, because the
Okay, you're saying that you can't just let your Indian managers, your local managers manage without some sort of oversight. It would seem to be a good practice to have local managers manage local people. So what suggestions do you have, what tips do you have, what advice for employers on how they can make sure that their local Indian managers don't mistreat their workers and don't engage in nepotism?
For this, it is absolutely essential that your global managers are given training like your GPHR, without which they should not be sent, and they should be sensitized to the cross-cultural realities which will prevail in that country, and in this case in India. And there should be cross-cultural training for them. And I would say that especially if you are in a manufacturing organization, they should also be trained in the Indian language, because without which it will not be so easy to understand the power realities at the workplace, especially in manufacturing. Because so far as service industry, software, BPO is concerned, to a great extent, the worker is westernized. He wears the same dress, he talks the same language as is talked in America or London, and expectations are the same. Especially, however, since the opportunities are more, they are moving out. There, the possibility of misuse is much less. But this organization which I was talking about was blue collar people, and even the middle managers were not from the first rate business schools. Okay, so they were not from that culture. So I was trying to contextualize it in the context of a manufacturing organization. So you sensitize your managers, the expatriates, in the cross culture, in knowing the expectations, and spend money on training of these expatriates, so that they are in know who is doing what, and then nobody should trade into their ignorance or cash upon in their ignorance. This is what I was saying. Then I would say that Indians are very emotional people, and traditionally, for various reasons, protecting the worker by employers has been practiced by many organizations very successfully. successfully. I gave the example of Tatas. Okay, it's a model for one and all, that if you can replicate Tatas, like the same set of people who are working in Tatas for long, they can go out at 3 times the salary, but they are not going. They are so much attached. Okay, so much, and this is a live example as to why, how Indians expect to be treated in an organization.
Can you tell us, talk a little bit about, have an issue with the sound?
Yeah, he just leans forward a little bit and goes off mic, so I'm just gonna pull that back a little bit. There you go.
Okay. In your session, you were talking about the potential drawbacks of unions in India. Can you kind of list for us some of the potential drawbacks for employers if a union is formed in India? And you mentioned things like union employees paid full time, they don't do any other work but union work. You mentioned the example of having chauffeur-driven limousines to come visit you. What are some of the issues that employers will face when a union is formed?
Because of the tremendous pressure on workers, it is difficult for employers today to compete and survive without flexibility. It is absolutely critical that you are flexible, which means that you are able to train, you are able to reduce the workforce size, you are able to adjust your reward strategies as per your cost limitations. And if therefore you unionize, surely it will be difficult for employers to operationalize these strategies. And for this reason, not just in India, globally, no employer wants a union. And therefore, if a union comes up, surely the cost will increase. For example, the Honda itself has about 2 months ago entered into a settlement where the wages of the workers, including incentives, has substantially gone up. So this is one. Then in most organizations, union leaders don't work at all. They do full time, though this should not be done. This is a kind of a subtle bribe which employers have to pay to keep union leaders in good humor. I'm not saying that unions are bad, but this is the practice which does not send the right signal to employees in general. And many times unions do not understand the compulsions of the management, because as I said that a large number of employers are going out of business because they are not able to compete successfully. So surely this is a global phenomenon that the density of unions is going down, and surely employers will be less flexible if unionization takes place. For example, in Honda itself, not a single day production targets have been met since union came into existence. I don't know whether this is good or bad. It is also possible that this is a situation of greater respect to the employees, and earlier on they were asked to work beyond their capacity, and because of the repression and because of the pressure of the managers, and not enjoying any power themselves, they were fulfilling those targets. But supposing in a humane way, in a dignified way, a worker could complete this much number of production, it may even be good. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that if you have a union, surely the employers will not be able to feel so comfortable in their competitive strategies.
Okay. I think we can actually take the glasses off.
Okay.
And we